Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1982 animated fantasy film, The Last Unicorn. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to a couple different people. First, I'd like to give a shout out to a good friend of mine named Jonathan for sending me this film on Blu-ray. And second, I'd like to give a shout out to John for requesting this film when it comes to a review. And if there's another review or a topic or a TV show that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Last Unicorn is one of those films that initially I did judge by its cover. I thought this was going to be lame. Based on the cover art, based on the screenshots, based on the fact that it deals with a unicorn and it's rated G. I thought this was going to be a kiddie film. I thought it was going to be forgettable. I thought it was honestly going to be pretty bad. I thought it was going to be like an episode of the 80s My Little Pony cartoon. Like, that's my initial expectation going in. So I have to be honest, I didn't really have the most hope for it. But after watching it, other than a few nitpicks, it surpassed most of my expectations for it. I would say this is a pretty good film. For what it is, I think it's definitely a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and I definitely do think it's better than what a lot of people's first impressions of it might be, just based on the concept and based on the trailer or even the film's poster. Now, the film is directed by the duo of Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. They are most well known for their Christmas shorts, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or Frosty the Snowman, or was there a Frosty the Snowman stop motion one? I don't know if they did that or not. But they did, The Year Without Santa Claus, The Little Drummer Boy, the Jack Frost one. It's a long-running series of films that they did that were very popular, and in a lot of ways still are, that deal with the Christmas season. They also did a adaptation in animation of The Hobbit. And I think for what this film is, they did a great job. They did a great job directing this. Animation direction is a different medium than live action, so the way that shots are set up is different, and in some ways can be even more challenging than live action direction because of the fact that you have more limitations. Like, when it comes to animation direction, at least around this time, you can't really do a lot of crazy, wild, inventive camera shots. You're limited in terms of the way you can move the camera or change the framing of a shot or change the perspective. You have more limitations. And I think when it comes to the realm of animation, you can have a lot of films, especially from this time, that look kind of static. They don't really have a good flow or movement to them. They just kind of trudge along from scene to scene visually when it comes to how one scene transitions to the next. And The Last Unicorn isn't one of those films. I think Rankin and Bass directed it in a way where it flows really well when it comes to the transitions or when it comes to sequences that feature action or a lot of things going on the screen or showcasing different sort of creatures and other dynamics visually. And there's a lot of consistency with their direction. The sequences that are showcasing the beauty and the grace of a certain landscape or of the unicorn are on display here, but so are sequences that show the darkness or the mysterious nature of a certain setting or certain characters. And overall, it just creates a very cinematic look and feel, despite the fact that there's a lot of limitations when it comes to the realm of animation and how a director can really put their personal touch on it or take risks or use different pans or zooms or different sort of camera techniques, because you're not necessarily using a camera, you're using in essence kind of a virtual camera. You're not using a real camera that you can move around and do all these different things with. You're limited in terms of the realm of animation. And I think Rankin and Bass, because of their experience with animated films, really did put that to use here. And it led to a really genuinely impressive film, despite the fact that it probably didn't have like a massive budget to work with when it comes to this animated feature. And as good as their direction is, though, this film would not be nearly as strong of a film without the efforts of Peter S. Beagle, who wrote the film, who also wrote the film's not he wrote the novel, which is the film's inspiration. And I think it definitely did help that you had Peter writing this, because he didn't have some outsider or somebody who wasn't really necessarily as familiar with the source material trying to make sense of it or making their own interpretation of it, leading to something being butchered or things being left out when it comes to the magic of the story. And it also helped that he had a lot of inherent passion for it, so that really made it so he was going to give it his best shot. Because there are a lot of instances where you have adaptations of a novel or a short story, and they're written by somebody who isn't necessarily as passionate about it, so they just kind of do it for a paycheck, and the results are usually very middling or bad. And that really wasn't the case here, because you had Peter S. Beagle, who loved the story and really wanted to do the best possible adaptation of it that he could. So much so that really he was his own enemy. He was the film's worst enemy initially, because he wanted to change things. He wanted to change the dialogue. He wanted to change certain things around. And one of the producers of the film set him aside and was like, hey, no, you don't have to do this. This dialogue is great just the way it is. And so are these scenes. And so are these other characters. You don't really have to do that much to make this into something that could work as a film. And Peter was open to that advice, and he took it to heart. And the film was so much better for it. Because of that, the film maintains and keeps those really good lines of dialogue and that flowing and just really wonderful writing that has a great tone and a great sense of whimsy and wonder and magic to it, and humanity. See, that's the thing that really makes this script stand out for me, is the humanity of it. Despite the fact that it's a fantasy realm and you've got unicorns and you've got giant red bulls and talking skeletons and singing butterflies. Despite all of this, there's a certain realism to it that I really feel makes it resonate on a much stronger level than a lot of other animated films of its time and even now. And that's because of the strength of the story itself and the fact that Peter tapped into those human emotions and feelings and the themes of grief and loss and loneliness and tied them into his story, and those also carried over into his adaptation of his novel. And all he really did is just trim certain things out when it comes to the novel compared to the script. Things that would affect the flow of the narrative, characters that seem extraneous, or other sequences that might be a little too difficult to pull off with the animation, given the film's budget. And he managed to maintain everything that just made his novel so magical, while making it more streamlined and taking the simple but effective story of a unicorn that goes on a journey of trying to find out whether or not she's the last unicorn into a genuinely compelling narrative with strong characters like Molly Grew and Prince Lear and Schmendrick, and even intriguing and complex villains like Haggard. Like Haggard isn't even necessarily a villain if you think about it. He's probably one of the first examples of the sympathetic villain that we all love and know and consider to be the archetype for a good villain, a good interesting villain in a lot of films today. And that just makes the film stand out even more in a good way when it comes to the script. Haggard is a more complex character because of the fact he's just not evil. He's just not a simple, straightforward, evil bad guy. There's more to him. He is a man who has so much trouble finding happiness in his life that the only thing that makes him happy are these unicorns. And because of that fact, he goes to extreme lengths to maintain that happiness and to feel happy. And he uses the Red Bull to lure all these unicorns into the sea so he can hold them captive, so he can have them at his beck and call to cheer him up. And you could really look at that as an allegory for anything, for a lot of things. And you really kind of could look at him and just be kind of honestly a man dealing with a deep depression. It makes him a much more tragic and interesting character because you can take that whole thing where only unicorns make him happy, and it turns into an obsession that ultimately destroys him by the end of the movie, and you can tie that into so many other things in reality. People who are addicted to alcohol, people who are addicted to drugs, people who do all these different things in order to make them happy and deal with their depression that ultimately destroy them. So that is something that is so captivating when it comes to the script. Another thing that's equally as captivating to me is the whole um, part of the film where the unicorn becomes human. And so that creates a really interesting identity crisis throughout the movie, where the unicorn, the more that she's human, the more that she's Almathia, she forgets who she is. And in the process of dealing with and experiencing humanity, she learns to appreciate or even like it. And so that leads to a identity crisis where it becomes a battle where she has to choose between whether or not to stay human and be with the prince whom she's fallen in love with, or become a unicorn again. And so that creates a very interesting and strong dynamic as well. I would say when it comes to the script, the stuff with Schmendrick is probably some of the weaker elements of the story. Not because the character itself is weak. I like Schmendrick as a character. He's a bumbling magician with a heart of gold, and there is a certain likable quality to him. But he's not as interesting as, for instance, Molly Grew, who is this member of this roving band of thieves who branches off from them to be with the unicorn and join the unicorn on her journey because she's always had this dream and fantasy of meeting a unicorn. And initially she is upset at the unicorn and even says, "Damn you," because of the fact that it's been so long. She's now an older woman. She's no longer this fair maiden that she used to be, and she's upset that when she finally gets to see this unicorn, it's at this point in her life, and that creates a very compelling character in terms of the fact that that's a very human thing, where you have women who aren't necessarily as, let's just say, enamored with their looks as they age, and they feel uh like there's just something wrong, or they're not who they once were, and they feel ashamed, which I think is wrong in a lot of ways, that this mindset is so prevalent among older women, but a lot of it is because of a lot of extraneous factors and so on. And I like the fact that this script and this overall story provides a character like that and shows that, yeah, you may not be what you once were, but you can still be beautiful. You can still see beauty in this world. And in this film, the unicorn itself still sees her for who she is, and as a good person, and sees certain beautiful qualities in her. And it's about what's on the inside, not necessarily uh, your outside appearance. And I do think that's a good message for a lot of people, not just kids, but also adults. But yeah, Schmendrick, they do really kind of, I would just say the writer, Peter, just kind of, he takes a little too many shortcuts with this character. Because this character, he starts out not really knowing how to do magic that well, but then all it takes for him to become a master magician is to just try harder and believe in himself more. And I think that was a little unbelievable considering how realistic a lot of the other characters are written in terms of their depth. So I feel that he could have had a little more struggle when it comes to him mastering his magic, because it just felt like he figured it out too quickly and too easily. And that really comes down to the script. And I understand why Almathea returns to be a unicorn again. But part of me wanted her to stay human, just for Prince Lear's sake. Because without her remaining human, he just kind of feels like the odd man out here when it comes to the way the film ends. It's like he doesn't really get a whole lot out of it, other than he gets to have this experience and so on. Um, but I get what they were trying to go for. She returns back to be a unicorn because she realizes she's no longer the last of her kind, and she has to do that in order to essentially save the other unicorn. So she had to make a sacrifice in order to uh, save all these hundreds of unicorns that were trapped in the sea by Haggard. And I like the other aspects of the script where it involves Almathea standing up for herself and fighting, and that's what leads to the Red Bull being defeated. It's not used to people, or especially unicorns, standing up for themselves against it. So that's what drives it back into the sea. Is the fact that Almathea gets the courage to fight back. And there's other elements of the script that are great too. Like I like the stuff with Mommy Fortuna. I like the fact that she has this traveling show where she has all these different sort of animals that are presented to people who pay for the carnival as if they're like these mythological creatures. But in reality, they're just regular animals that she's using magic to trick people. I thought that was interesting. And I think they handled the harpy well in that scene. I think that was a good way to introduce Schmendrick as a character. And there are some things, though, where the tone is a little off, like a tree with tits. Like, really? I mean, and the harpy has like tits and nipples for some reason, too. I don't understand that. But those are really some of the small tonal inconsistencies that do kind of bug me when it comes to this movie. Like the tree with the tits, the butterfly in the beginning who wouldn't shut the hell up and it was just obnoxious and annoying. The humor at times are just kind of hit and miss. I will say this though, it does have some major hits. Like I really love Skull. I love the skeleton that was speaking in riddles and just wanted wine. I thought the way that particular scene and the skeleton was written was rather witty. But yeah, just a few minor nitpicks when it comes to the script here. For the most part, it's relatively on point, especially for the kind of film that it is. It's a simple story, but it's effective, and I think the characters are strong enough, and I think there's enough interesting and intriguing dynamics to really make the film rather compelling. Despite the fact that it's a rated G animated movie about a unicorn. And another thing that helps the film be compelling and helps it reach a high level of quality is the voice cast. Rankin and Bass were ahead of their time here. Because if you really think about it, having Hollywood actors involved with animated projects is not something that was relatively common around this time. It's a lot more common nowadays. In fact, it's mostly an expectation. I mean, look at the cast of the latest Super Mario Brothers movie, for instance. It's like a relative who's who of Hollywood actors and actresses. But back in 1982, or when they were working on this film in like the early 80s, that wasn't as common. So to have a voice cast that includes Mia Farrow as the unicorn and Lady Amathia, Alan Arkin as Schmendrick, Jeff Bridges as Prince Lear, Tammy Grimes as Molly Grew, Robert Klein as the Butterfly, Angela Lansbury's Mommy Fortuna, Christopher Lee as King Haggard, Keaton Wynn as Captain Cully, or Renee Auberjonois as the Skull, or Brother Theodore as the Hunchback who worked for Mommy Fortuna. Having all of these relatively well-known actors really did add a lot of credibility to this project, but on top of that, really added a lot of genuine just realism to the film in another way, because these actors, because of the fact that they're such professionals, they approached their characters as if it was any other production. They weren't trying to over emote or try to overact or try to do too much in order to differentiate their acting from voice acting, that kind of thing. Because I've seen that before, where people will get a voiceover role and then they'll just overdo it because they're doing a cartoon or they're doing a bit of animation. So they think that it needs to be more animated, no pun intended, and it doesn't always need to be that way. It depends on the context. And with this film, Rankin and Bass really made it a point to tell these actors to just play it naturally. Just read these lines and do all of this as if you're like doing a play or something. Like, don't do this as if you're doing a cartoon or something for kids. And I really do feel that paid off in a huge way when it comes to this film, because there's just some really great voice acting in this, from Mia Farrow as the unicorn, Alan Arkin as Smendrick. Jeff Bridges is kind of uneven at times, but he did it as a favor to Rankin and Bass because of the fact that he liked the story, and he also wanted to work with Renee, who voiced the Skull. And he was even saying, hey, I'll do it for free, or I'll do it for a lower price because I just want to work with my friend Renee, and I also really like the story, and I just want to be a part of this. And they had the role of Prince Lear available, and so he took it. Tammy Grimes is terrific as Molly Grew. She is a really great character. And in large part, Tammy brings a certain sadness and realism to that role, to that character, that just makes it come to life. Robert Klein, I didn't care for as a butterfly. I thought the butterfly was annoying, wouldn't shut up, but I'm not really going to be too hard on Robert Klein because that's probably what the role entailed. Angela Lansbury is amazing as Mama Fortuna. The witch who's using the illusions at the carnival and captures the harpy. Christopher Lee is magnificent as King Haggard. He was a enormous fan of the novel, and he did this relatively for free as well because of the fact that he just loved the source material and he wanted to be a part of this. And he respected what Peter S. Beagle did so much that when he did the line reading for Haggard's speech near the end of the film, he even told Peter, "Do you want me to do it again? Because I will gladly do another take if you feel that this isn't satisfactory." And Peter was like, "No, no, it was great. It was wonderful. It was fantastic." And that just shows the commitment that Christopher Lee had to this particular role in the film. Keenan Wynn was a lot of fun as Captain Cully, the leader of the group of bandits. He always does a great job playing these gruff, just jerk characters. And Renee, I absolutely loved the scenes with the skull. Like, Renee was so good. And Beagle praised his performance as well. He said he could have played any role in that movie and I would have been happy because he's that talented. And he really is. He steals the show. Like, I love that scene. I love that the way that he portrays the skull. And Brother Theodore was fun too as Rook, the hunchback, who's a henchman or a companion to Mommy Fortuna. You might recognize him. He's been in The Burbs. He's been in a lot of stuff. He was the voice in the infamous trailer for House by the Cemetery. So it was fun to hear his voice. And yeah, everyone did a great job, except for when Jeff Bridges and Mia Farrow tried to sing. That's the only exception. When they were doing their voiceover roles, it was immersive, it was incredible, really great stuff. But when they tried to sing, it was like nails on a chalkboard. But other than that, really good. Really good performances. Film also features some nice cinematography by Hiroyasu Omoto. And cinematography and animation is a different sort of thing compared to live action as well. But it looks really nice. It's a nice looking film. It has a good look to it. It really does look like a painting come to life, you really are seeing scenes from a legitimately magical place that's not of this earth. It's in another dimension of just fantasy and magic. The editing by Tomoko Kita was also terrific. Really well edited film. And had a good score by Jimmy Webb, who apparently was recommended by Jeff Bridges. Jeff Bridges knew Jimmy and got Jimmy on board, as well as America, who did songs for the film. And that's another element of this film that just really surprised me. Like, I liked a fair number of songs from this. I really like the opening title by America called The Last Unicorn. And I also like the song Mare's Road, or Man's Road. That's what it's called, actually. Man's Road, not Mare's Road. Mare's Road would make sense because it's a unicorn, but it's Man's Road. I like that song as well. Some of the other songs, like, I didn't care for as much because I didn't feel they were as memorable or they weren't sung as well. But Jimmy Webb did some good instrumental pieces as well that tied into the film in a good way. And for a piece of animation, like, this has some amazing, just gorgeous, just really great animation by a company called Topcraft in Japan. Now, the storyboards and a lot of the designs for the characters, they were done by Rankin and Bass, by their team in the United States, but the animation itself was done overseas. It was done in Japan. And it was done by Topcraft, who would go on to do Nausicaa. And you had a lot of the animators who worked on this movie who would go on to work on Studio Ghibli films, which is why it has this anime look to it, which is just amazing. It's just a great looking movie, and it's just one of those things where the visuals of it are just so splendid and spectacular that even though there are some other limitations with the script or maybe some other aspects of it that aren't necessarily as good as they could be, it still is a really uh it's a really good watch just to see the visuals and I just like the aesthetic. I love the aesthetic of this film. It's a really nice looking aesthetic. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on The Last Unicorn, a film that I honestly would recommend if you are a fan of animation or fantasy films if you haven't seen it yet. And yeah, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.